Hello and welcome to Inside China. I'm Shelley Zhang. In our previous episode, we introduced the book China's Pitfall, written by renowned modern economist Ms. HeQingLian. Every book not only contains an author's ideas, but it's also a reflection of their personal philosophy and lifelong experience. So to help you get a better idea of what's behind this book, today we'll introduce you to Ms. HeQingLian and her story.
I feel that my personal story is not really my own individual story. Indeed, this book changed my life, but I only wanted to conduct some research based on my own academic knowledge and interests. As my area of research is overly sensitive in China, after the book came out, many events took place outside of my control. Due to the contents of criticism against corruption in China, the Central Propaganda Department banned me from publishing articles in all print media, and I also was forbidden from taking the book to publishers. Before these events, there were people who used various channels to warn me not to write anymore. I remember once, when I returned to Shenzhen from Xi'an, I met a lady on the plane who said I had published a book in Hong Kong entitled China's Pitfall, which was extremely reactionary, and that a copy was to be given to each member of the Central Politburo Committee. She said that she knew clearly at that time where I lived in Shenzhen, the location where I worked, and the age of my son. Moreover, she said when I conducted interviews at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, she knew the room number of the hotel in which I stayed. I asked her, "Why didn't you take any action?" She replied that there were different viewpoints within the Chinese Communist Party's Central Politburo Committee. Some felt the book was extremely reactionary and that the author should immediately be placed under arrest. Another group felt that the book only stated facts and did not fabricate anything, thus it was not a concern. Yet another side felt the book revealed various types of conflicts and problems since the revolution in China and truly reflected the patriotism of an academic. She said because of the three different opinions, the matter was left unresolved.
Soon
after, the 15th National Congress was to be held, so there was no more time to discuss the matter. Hence, when the book China's Pitfall was published in January 1998, it was so widely spread there was no longer any point in discussing the issue. From her, I came to realize that I had unknowingly faced a very dangerous situation at one stage.
When did they begin to monitor you?
Since March 2003, when I faced dismissal from my work for publishing the article analyzing the changes of social structure in modern China. They tried forcing my employer to dismiss me by stating I had committed some crime related to the economy. Their excuse was all reporters in China received red packages or bribery. And since I had worked in the newspaper for such a long time and had been a director in a number of departments, they considered it likely that I had also taken such bribery. They intended to dismiss me by uncovering just one such case. In the end, my employer really could not find any related incident on me because I had never taken such red packages. Subsequently, they asked my employers to force my resignation and dispatched 12 people from my neighborhood to take turns in monitoring my actions. Wherever I went, someone would follow. They would also forbid me from speaking at forums or attending meetings. I am quite reluctant to recall those experiences because it was a life deprived of dignity and forced one to live in terror. I therefore chose to come to the United States as a visiting academic and only returned to China when there was a change in the situation. But during the process of my visa applications, my home was secretly ransacked 3 times and some items were stolen. I remember the final time was on the 13th of June when I discovered broken windows upon my return home. The ceiling of our toilet was also pulled down. I could feel perhaps that they would not permit me to leave. Under those circumstances, I faced the dangers of arrest. I did not want to go to jail. I felt that as a scholar who only sought to share my knowledge to the nation, I did not wish for any resulting benefits, nor did I want to be a part of that group. I could criticize and I was willing to face consequences, but jail was another thing. I knew that Chinese communist prisons were really horrifying, so I decided to escape, and I owe my success to great fortune. I was aware of the risks that came with speaking words of truth in China, but at that time I really did not imagine that the regime could be so despicable. Before 1998, the regime would reprimand you through the Central Propaganda Department and disallow you from publishing articles and books, as well as hinder any possible future promotions at work. However, after 1998, special agents from the National Security Bureau became increasingly involved with public lifestyle and society. Thus, the situation of scholars became more endangered. Also, Jiang Zemin once stated in Shanghai, political issues should be resolved through non-political ways. In other words, when you have offended them through literature works, they will not search for loopholes within your articles, but rather frame you for other crimes. If it was a man, they would frame you for visiting prostitutes and say that you have committed crimes of corruption. There is already an abundance of such examples. I remember a private discussion with some friends in China. We decided we must take precaution on these matters. In the later stages, whenever I went out, I would bring my young son with me. I would not accept any guests during nighttime for fear of these troubles. I feel once a nation has reached such a stage, then really it is too despicable. So to speak the truth in China is really not an easy task. This is also the reason for the scarceness of scholars who dare to speak the truth in China, and the reason for them being such treasures.
Were there any big events that had an impact on you during your childhood?
I think for me, the biggest impact would be the Cultural Revolution in 1968, the massacre in Hunan. I had witnessed the propaganda of the Holocaust, which is now on the internet. Shaoyang is a branch below the lower reaches of Jiang Rivers in Shaoyang County, located upstream from where we lived. Back then, for a long period of time, every day, there were hundreds of bodies floating in the river. They killed these people that belonged to the landlords, the rich, the rebels, the bad, and the rightist groups. After that, some were buried, some were thrown into the mountains, and some into the river. The bodies that floated along the river were only a small part. We went there to have a look at that time. I felt very, very sad. I would think, why does the regime that claims itself to be the best government, the people's government, and the most humane and magnificent government do such evil things? From that point on, I was deeply suspicious of the Communist Party's propaganda. That's when I started thinking about it. At that time, I was only 12 years old.
Can you describe the environment you grew up in?
Through 3 generations, our family practiced traditional Chinese medicine. My father was famous among the locals, but our family's situation became very tragic during the Cultural Revolution. My father was sent to rural areas. In his later years, he became semi-paralyzed and half-psychotic. He later died. The Cultural Revolution was the cause of his suffering. My brothers and sisters were forced to go to rural areas, and I was sent to repair the railway. I brought a few books with me, 300 Tang poems, Tang and Song Popular Writers Selection, as well as several other novels. I was told on by a girl who I shared a room with. I was criticized and had a big poster taped to my door. I was under great pressure.
I
later wrote an article about this called Tomb in the Deepest Soul. I do not like recalling these particularly unhappy memories. However, I often have dreams of these memories. I've said before that at the beginning, after my experience of writing the book in 1998, I was really reluctant to talk to people, but I would often go back there in my dreams and be so frightened. For various sensitive reasons, I didn't talk to people about these kinds of things when I was in China. So I think it has left a very deep scar on my heart. I personally feel that people who have experienced the Cultural Revolution will deeply re-examine the Chinese political system. However, the degree of each person's understanding, depending on one's education, is all different. I think that if people take a closer look, they would see that this political system is not reasonable nor in line with human nature.
You first studied history at your university, but then continued with economics. Why did you make that change?
I think history should be one of the basic courses in university. Each student should systematically understand their country's history and the history of the world. However, China's education in this aspect is quite inadequate. The history of Chinese Communist Party itself is a result of expurgation and tampering. There is absolutely no truth behind it. It replaced the history of China with the history of the party. My four-year history course enabled me to have a historical perspective, something other economists do not have. When I consider a question, I like to consider it under the historical background. Then, why did I change to economics? When I graduated in 1983, it was during the time when society discussed why farmers left their land and moved to the city, how the rural revolution turned into a rural-urban shift. At the time, I was a teacher in Hunan Institute of Finance and Economics. Some of the young teachers loved to get together and talk about problems, but then I found out that a lot of questions could not be explained using history, so I decided to study economics. I believed that the essence of these two courses would benefit me.
In China, you had a very good job and lifestyle, so why did you take such a huge risk to do your research?
There's a saying in China, the rise and fall of the nation concerns everyone. In ancient Chinese tradition, one would care more about the interests of the country than about personal interests. Lin Zhechu wrote a poem that was very representative. Life and death to benefit the country cannot just enjoy the fortune and escape the calamity. It means that as long as it is in the favor of the country, one should not care about one's life or death. Therefore, I do not struggle over my own personal loss or gain, but really consider what should or should not be said. I believe that the conscience of academics is a very important quality. This is why I don't agree with some Chinese economists who say the economy is ethnically neutral and economists do not need a conscience. I believe as a scholar, especially as an economic scholar, he at least has to know when a policy is implemented which class would benefit. Secondly, those who profited, through what means did they attain this profit? All these things have to be morally judged. Amongst the Chinese people, the intellectual elite are still a small number. I think there must be someone who takes up this responsibility. So I did what an intellectual should do.
Ms. HeQingLian is now an advisor at Princeton University in the United States, where she focuses her research on the socioeconomic issues facing contemporary China. In her preface to The Pitfalls of Modernization, Ms. He writes about her hope that other Chinese who share her experience of suffering and persecution can one day return, fearless and dignified, to a new China, the China that they have worked to better for so many years.